All right, welcome everyone. My name is Hallie Caldwell, and I'm a member of the Quad Education team. And I'm so glad you could all join us for our webinar this evening on building your college list and the art of choosing schools and finding your best fit school. We have two fantastic Quad consultants with us today who are going to walk you through this process. And yeah, we'll dive right in. So today we'll introduce our two panelists. We'll talk about the importance of choosing the right college, factors to consider in the selection process, talk about how to narrow down and finalize your list, go over any additional tips and tricks, and then we'll open things up for a Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to pop your question in the Q&A box and we will be sure to get to those at the end. All right, so we have Maisha and Jennifer here with us today, and I'm going to allow them to each introduce themselves. Maisha, can you let us know a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thanks, Hallie. So thank you all for joining today. My name is Maisha Rahman. I'm an admissions counselor as well as a QRI counselor for research. I did my undergrad studies from Columbia University, and then I proceeded to go do my PhD at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So I'd love to talk to you guys more about how I decided to go to Columbia and all the factors that I factored in.
Thank you so
Hello,
much.
everyone.
Jennifer?
Sorry. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer White. I'm delighted to be with you all this evening, and thank you for making the time to embark on this important topic. My background is that I studied at Harvard University and earned my degree, my undergraduate degree there in English and East Asian Studies, worked for a few years at a research institute there at Harvard, and then did my graduate work abroad in Tokyo, Japan. Afterwards, I've been directing study abroad programs for several decades, helping students apply to selective institutions abroad, and then have leveraged that experience now for Quad as an admissions consultant. And my past experience in admissions also includes work at Washington University in St. Louis, among other schools. So we're looking forward to speaking with you this evening.
Thank you both so much for being here. I'm excited to have you both walk us through this process. So let's jump right in and talk about why it's important to think about the schools that you choose to apply to, how the right choices, making the right choices there are really important. Jennifer, do you want to start us off here?
Certainly. So as you're thinking ahead to your undergraduate experience, it's really important to be evaluating a number of factors, including the environment, the opportunities that your college or university experience will open up for you. And it really will help you chart your future course. I know as a result of my undergraduate studies and getting to know the faculty that I did at Harvard, that positioned me extremely well for my graduate work. On a fully funded scholarship from the Japanese Ministry of Education that I didn't even know existed before I was a student there, and certainly wouldn't have had a chance of competing and being awarded without the support of my faculty mentors. And they also really helped me develop a research plan for my graduate studies. As you're thinking about what your right college is going to be, there's going to be a lot of self-reflection that's very important in the process. So you need to be thinking about what your needs are, doing a real serious needs assessment of what will help you succeed academically and personally, as well as what are you looking for in terms of your values and your future goals, either for graduate study or for your career going forward. So as you're working with your quad counselor, we really like to get to know you as an individual, what makes you you, and then we match that with our knowledge of institutions throughout the country and sometimes internationally as well to help you find the best fit.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Maisha, do you have anything to add here before we move on?
No, but I guess, yes, I totally agree with Jennifer that this is the first step to the rest of your life, really. Picking the right college for you makes a huge difference down the line. And being able to reflect and think, that's my alma mater, is really special. And it sets you up for future success. So it's really crucial to take time, talk to your family members, talk to your admissions counselors, talk to people at your school to really help make the right decision when it comes to applications.
All right, fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about why you're all here, which is how to actually build a balanced school list. Maisha, you want to take this slide?
Sure. So what do we really mean by a balanced list? This means a few different things. One of these things includes, which we'll which we'll touch upon later, is creating different categories of schools that you want to apply to. There are things called reach schools, there are things called safety schools. So we'll go into that later. But here, what we're saying is creating a balanced list is what will really maximize your potential chances of getting into a college that'll be right for you and that'll keep you happy. So other things that go into creating a balanced list is keeping your interests in mind. You know, we are complex creatures. We have very varied interests. So kind of keeping in mind what kind of programs you might be interested in, what locations you might be interested in, finances, all these things will come into play as we talk about building this balanced college list.
All right. So the benefits of having a well-balanced college list.
So there are many benefits, among them, and we're going to outline several, I think about 5 or 6 for you here, 3 of which are that as you build a list that reflects that, that spread of reach and target and safety schools, it's going to result in higher acceptance rates overall. That is really going to set you up for success long term. We don't want to see you apply to 10 super reach schools and not get into any of them in this super competitive landscape, and then be wondering what you're going to be doing for the next 4 years, or just sort of have this mini crisis of, oh my gosh, I thought I was meant to be here at this kind of a school. Now what am I going to be doing? So it's a competitive landscape, and we work in a data-driven environment where we look at in-depth knowledge that your admissions counselor brings, knowing what creates a compelling application at different schools and where you're going to be seen as an ideal candidate. So as you're working with your consultant, then you're getting that kind of expert coaching as well. Secondly, it's going to lead to a really good outcome for you in terms of finding a best fit institution and overall having a positive experience. You'll have, hopefully, in the spring of your senior year, a range of schools to be able to choose from. Some of my students have scholarship opportunities where they're, running up to the May 1st deadline and they're still deciding between schools, and schools are saying, well, hey, how about another, increase in your scholarship award if you'll come and study with us for merit-based, academic-based scholarships. This isn't even looking at financial need. So when you craft a well-balanced list, you're going to really open more doors for yourself, as well as finding an institution that's really a great fit for you in terms of your goals and priorities. Then, as we've been talking about, it's really going to promote success for you in terms of your academic options and career opportunities. I like to think of this process as, there is no perfect high school. There's no perfect vacation. There's no perfect day. Everything has ups and downs, and everything has pros and cons. So what might be the best school for your best friend might not be the best school for you. And again, it all comes back to doing self-reflection and goal setting and identifying your own individual priorities so that we can help you identify what's going to lead you to success, and then allow you to both explore academic interests that you already have, and then may also open some opportunities for you to explore academic and career interests that you'd never considered before you even started attending the school that you end up choosing.
I love how you put that, especially the part about, a perfect school for your friend might not be the perfect school for you. No, that was definitely true for myself. And I think everyone has something like that.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit more about some benefits of having a well-balanced list.
Right. So a few more things to take into account include finances. It's no surprise to anyone that paying for college is not a light task. Um, no matter what school you go to, tuition is expensive. But as Jennifer had mentioned, there are different scholarships to keep into account. There are different schools that have different levels of tuition. And overall, you have to keep in mind what's feasible for you and your family, to look into potential loans, to look into financial aid offices at different colleges. All these things are pretty important to keep in mind. Something else to keep in mind is diverse experiences and personal growth. So I went into college knowing that I wanted to study some sort of STEM field. I ended up majoring in neuroscience and behavior. However, having been at Columbia, I was also exposed to the core curriculum, which was fantastic. I did so many humanities classes, had a lot of seminar courses, and I think going in, I didn't realize how much I would appreciate these courses and these classes and courses other than my major. So, keeping an open mind, knowing that, the program that you apply to doesn't have to be strictly based on what you want to do in your career. College is a time to, become more well-rounded and learn things you might not be exposed to in high school or just in day-to-day life. So keeping these things in mind is important when looking for different kinds of schools. You might be happy in a place that you never thought you'd be happy in, but to find out, it's good to keep a balanced list, look through different colleges, look at different places. And that also includes having the third point, which is having safety schools. As we had mentioned earlier, in this competitive landscape, you never know, no matter how hard you try, no matter how great your quad consultants are, it's kind of at the end, a little bit of luck, but of course, a lot of perseverance. But just to be safe, it's good to have schools that your stats will blow them out of the water. So overall, all these things are quite important to keep in mind when making this list.
They're all great points. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about safety schools in a few slides, but I would love for either one of you to talk, maybe just take a second to talk about how, having safety schools doesn't mean that they're bad schools, or it doesn't, like, you shouldn't add a safety school that you wouldn't thrive at and enjoy being at.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. A couple of my students, as they were weighing their options back and forth, they felt like, well, this is kind of a waste of time or whatever. But it really wasn't in the end, because especially if you can find a safety school that's got a rolling admissions process and you can see yourself there and they can see you there. And then you start off with an admission and you're like, yay, I got in somewhere. And so then if you don't get into your top ED1 school, then you're like, okay, I still have this one. And then you start adding to that, and it just builds like some momentum and a sense of accomplishment in you as you're going through the process. So that's one thing that I've seen work really well for students. A note of caution though, if you're a really, really top student and you're applying to something that would just, you're, several layers removed from their target student population, they might not accept you. I've been seeing this lately with my seniors. Because you're so overqualified, they know you're not going to attend. So you want to be carefully selecting your safety school, like Hallie said, to be a place where you could be happy and thrive, but where you're not, too overqualified to attend.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jennifer. And I think one way to potentially combat being overqualified for your safety school is to pick safety programs, because there are competitive programs within these so-called safety schools that you may be interested in. For example, there are honors colleges in state schools, for example, or like pharmacy programs within like a local school. So that can also help you kind of not guarantee, but give a better chance of you getting admission into your so-called safety school.
Thank you both. I think that's really fantastic advice. And we'll obviously dive into this more later, but also if you have any questions about this further, you can ask in the Q&A or talk to your quad counselor as well. So let's talk about some factors to consider while you're building your school list. So how to decide how to look at schools and figure out whether or not you might want to be putting them on your list.
So 4 factors that we're going to talk about just to get us started thinking about this: location, the kind of campus culture and environment that's available, the cost, as we've been discussing, is a very important consideration, as well as the programs and opportunities. So sometimes when I'm talking with my students and their families, the parents say, I want them to be close. And I can see the student kind of, I want to be far away. And so we need to have a discussion about what constitutes too close and what constitutes too far. And, think about compromise and things that can work for everyone, involved. So that's one thing. You also want to think about, do you prefer a city, suburb, or rural setting? With the caveat that I was right next to Boston and I didn't see Boston except for when my family came to town to visit for the time that I was at school. I didn't ever venture across the river. And many students will just happily nest into their campus environment and go off campus only on occasion. So I wouldn't make this necessarily your top priority. That's just my advice. But there are important considerations like internship opportunities that you might have available to you in some locations. There might be more of those available to you than in others. So you do want to be thinking that through. It's very important to be thinking about size. You can select one of the Claremont Consortium schools in Southern California that have enrollments under 1,000 students. You can be at the University of Michigan and other large institutions that have 30, 40, 50,000 undergraduates and more. And you need to try it out. If you haven't already had the chance, just go locally and visit a small campus. Visit a medium-sized campus, 5 to 15,000 students, and visit a large one and see if you have a preference. If you start to feel like, hey, my high school was really tiny, I am going to feel lost in a big school, or conversely, I can't wait to get to a bigger school and really explore just being as a part of a larger community than I've ever been able to. Think about what values and traditions the college has and how those map to your individual interests and goals. And then for cost, again, something that's super important, because in my years of working at a variety of institutions, in students kind of thinking and planning, they didn't necessarily think ahead for 4 years of the tuition cost. And so I did see some students who were academically well qualified. They didn't have a medical issue that was forcing them to change their plans, but it was a financial reason that they needed to withdraw from the university before they got their degree. So we definitely want you and your family to be carefully considering the full cost of attendance. There are net tuition calculators and price calculators on college websites that you can use to find out exactly what it's going to look like for you. And then don't be afraid to ask for more scholarships, to talk about financial aid options with the financial aid office, and to apply for a lot of outside scholarships as well. And then for the programs and opportunities, it's super important to get to know the curriculum of the institutions that you're looking at. One biochem major at one institution is not going to be the same as a biochem major at another institution. What are the research priorities of the faculty? How do they align with you? How many electives do you get to take? Is there a semester that is flexible enough to allow for you to do study abroad? All these things are really important to get to know, and it's all available to you on the website. You just need to do your due diligence and do your research and really dive into that curriculum, which I kind of think of as your roadmap for the 4 years of your academic journey.
Thank you. That was a ton of information. Maisha, do you have anything else to add here?
No, I think I'll kind of harken back to what Jennifer mentioned in the next few slides, actually.
Perfect. All right, so let's talk about some steps to researching and identifying a range of potential colleges.
Okay, so step one, self-reflection. Now this is where the factors that Jennifer had brought up are really important. And everyone has different priorities, right? It depends on you, your family, your situation, what you want to study, what's most important to you. Do you want to factor in location first? Is that number one? Is the campus culture number one? Is the cost what's most important? Is the kind of program or the internships or the curricula most important to you? So you really have to sit and take some time, talk to people who care about you, talk to people who know you, to help understand and decide how you want to prioritize this college selection list. And then the next step is research. And the best way to do research is to go directly on these college websites. Once you do the self-reflection and utilize the college websites to do self-reflection, kind of take a deeper dive. Go through the admissions processes on each college webpage, see what's required. Here we're mentioning that you can use just basic Google search or College Board. You can read different forums, you can talk to different alum, you can reach out to people on LinkedIn even. Now it's very common to hear from younger students who see that you've gone to a school that they aspire to go to, and everyone's very happy to be a mentor and answer questions. So there are many different ways to do research. Here we're also talking about actually going to colleges. It is true that a large college versus a mid-sized college versus a small college, it's a very different vibe, very different air, very different environment. So if you can, visiting those colleges and doing your in-person research is very, very helpful. And then the last step we have here is to actually build your list. So now that you have sat down, really, talk to yourself and figured out what are your passions, what are your priorities, and you have a solid, you've done your due diligence, done your research, now you can start building your list. It's great to stay organized when you're building your list and have a spreadsheet. It can be on Google Sheets, can be on Excel, Word, whatever your preference is. But to have a list, to have like a chart mapping out, let's say, your 3 different levels of schools, your target schools, your reach schools, within reach schools, your safety schools, and then what's required for the application. Are there interviews? How many letters do you need, et cetera, et cetera. So staying organized is really key to making this very stressful time much more manageable.
A couple of things that I'd like to add as well are that back to our part about research in step 2, if you're not able to visit in person, one thing that the pandemic brought is a wealth of information that's available virtually. So even before you make plans to visit a college campus, you can get a really good sense of what the values are, what the traditions are, what the feel of the place is like, from attending virtual information sessions with engaging student ambassadors who are volunteers from each college or university who have offered to be available to respond to inquiries from students who are considering attending there. There's a real treasure trove of information that's available virtually. So we definitely want you to engage that way as well, as following colleges on social media and learning everything that you can about them through their websites. Also, as you're building your list, one thing that's important to think about here is that, again, like I said before, your list is not going to look like another student's list. It needs to reflect your own unique strengths and interests. And many schools, many high schools use supportive application softwares. You might have access to Naviance or Score or Maya Learning or another in-house software at your high school that's going to track admissions history over time for students from your school. And that data is really valuable. So if you happen to attend a school that has access to historical records of how many students have gotten into XYZ school and what were their scores like, that's really important information that's available to you as a member of your school community. And it's important to be aware of that as well.
Thank you both. That was a lot of great information. I will also add on the research part, Jennifer, you brought up social media, and also YouTube is a great place if you're looking for campus tours, especially during the pandemic. A ton of schools had students go around campus filming tours. You see that, or like a day in the life, and those are great resources as well. So let's talk a little bit more about that balanced list and kind of how to start factoring or placing your schools.
Absolutely. So again, I mentioned earlier on being data driven, and we want to be, looking at not just where you would love to attend, which is wonderful. We want everybody to have a couple of dream schools, but also where your academic performance and your extracurricular interests, any leadership, any awards that you've received indicate that you would be a good fit for a given institution. And one easy way to assess that information is to access what's called the Common Data Set. And it's CDS for short, Common Data Set. It's available at any institution. Some make it a little easier to find than others. Some bury it in the Office of Institutional Research, and you've got to peel back layers of an onion, sometimes 7 or 8 layers to get to this data mine. But it will tell you a lot of information about the entering freshman class. It'll give you a whole lot of other information too. You could spend days digesting all the information that's available, but for our purposes, you would be looking at the first year admissions rates and data relative to that. So you'll find things like average GPA, the range of SAT and ACT scores, and many colleges publish that from a 25% to 75% band. So don't think of it as like, oh, I need to get scores within these numbers, say it's 1400 to 1550. Well, the 1400 represents the top of the 25%, the lowest 25% statistically of the students' scores who were admitted into the school. And then the 1550 represents the floor of the top 25% of the students who were admitted to the school. So you're looking to be at the upper end of that range, unless you have a really distinguishing qualification that would still make you competitive for that school. And your counselor is going to walk you through all of this, but that's just the shorthand and the way to understand a lot of the data that you'll be seeing. Then you want to evaluate where you fall within that range. Numbers aren't everything, but the way I describe it is that numbers will open the door. If you have the qualifications, you exceed the qualifications, the door is going to open or open very wide and quickly for you. If you don't have those qualifications, you're going to need to have a compelling why or a compelling achievement in another area that maps really well with that institution's goals. So you want to do a thorough self-assessment in this way and just be realistic and grounded in the process. Then you also, again, just want to be thinking about the campus culture, the climate, and how well that is going to match with who you are as a person outside of your academic pursuits. Because, of course, while college is very important for your academic growth and development, it's equally important for your development as an individual.
All right, let's talk a little bit about determining and balancing reach, target, and safety schools.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, so we've kind of been throwing around these terms, and for those of you who aren't familiar, let's just give some definitions. So what is a reach school? We're defining it as a school where you have less than a 20% chance of getting in. And this is based on your stats being below the threshold of the typical acceptance student. This is based on the data that Jennifer was mentioning that different schools usually provide on their websites, or sometimes you have to dig a little deeper. Nowadays, we've found that for many a school that sometimes the acceptance rate is less than 15% overall. So now we're kind of putting these in the reach school categories just based on the competition to get into these schools. Target school is where you have a 20 to 80% chance of acceptance. So your profile essentially matches that of the average candidate who is typically accepted to this institution. And a safety school is where you will, like I said before, blow them out of the water with your stats. You have an over 80% chance of admission, your GPA, your test scores, your extracurriculars, etc., leads you to be a very qualified candidate, more so than the average student who's accepted at that institution.
All right. So once you have a list of schools, you might want to narrow it down. You might have a really large list. Let's talk a little bit about how to kind of finalize that list.
Sure. You're going to find as you go through, you may start with 30 colleges, 40 colleges. I know students who have applied to 20 or 25 because they just wanted to have this really robust list. You don't need to do that. Usually 10 to 12 to 15 is very doable and enough to give you good admissions chances if you've thought it through. So here for review basically are all of the factors that we've been discussing so far. I think that where I see the super reach and reach, it's my dream to go to fill in the blank, which just might be outside the realm of possibility. Where I've seen that backfire for students in particular is with the early decision round, or the restrictive early action for schools like Stanford that use that rubric in their admissions. These are the November 1st deadlines. And this is where you want to be as strategic as you possibly can. Because if you can pick a school that's just a little bit out of reach, it's like a little stretch, not like you got to shoot for, behind the free throw line and hope that you make it, just really, taking a shot in the dark. You want to have it be a realistic reach and not like a super duper reach. Then you could lock down your college application journey. You're going to be going to a great school for your academic goals and your personal goals, and you're going to be done with the whole process. Because college applications are a lot of work. Princeton, you have to submit a graded paper. MIT's application is designed to scare you off. It doesn't use the common application, it's its whole universe. Stanford has a very involved application process, lots and lots of detailed questions. And some schools are easier to apply to than others. And a lot of times my students are thinking, okay, my real goal schools, I'm not going to care about how much work they are. as I add some additional schools into the process, I'm going to take a look at how much work it is, because I have to still be engaged in my internships and work experiences in the summer leading up to my senior year. I still have to be academically on point. Some students are still finishing up testing for standardized testing in the junior summer. There's a lot going on. So we want you to be realistic and thoughtful about the process and just really review all of these criteria that we've been discussing.
All right, let's go over some final tips and then we'll open up our Q&A.
Oh, just to add also that it does cost money to apply to every single school. So if you do have a list of 40 schools, do keep in mind that each school has about $85 or more application fee, or a little less. So I would definitely recommend narrowing down the list if you can. So this is just some final tips summarizing what we've talked about so far in the seminar. So really creating your final list. Keep in mind to narrow down your options, given your priorities, given your preferences, what factors you find are most crucial for defining your future success and your happiness. Identify colleges based on your personal stats, your academic goals, what programs they have, what their curriculums look like. Have a mix of different levels of colleges that you're applying to, and take note. So keep that spreadsheet handy of all the deadlines. If you're applying ED, EA, regular decision, deadlines for sometimes supplemental materials, deadlines for separate essays, keep all those in one file so you have a go-to place to kind of check off the box. And lastly, speak to those who you trust around you, your teachers, your counselors, your friends, your mentors, your quad consultants, anyone who you think can give you good advice. Seek it out. That doesn't mean you have to take that advice, but I think it's good to hear different perspectives, especially from people who know you well. So hopefully it'll be a good experience, and reach out to any of us if you have any questions.
Absolutely. Thank you for those tips. And I think one that's not on here too is that you shouldn't be putting colleges on your list that you wouldn't be thrilled to attend. And that goes for safety schools as well. And there are so many schools to choose from that can fit in that. All right, so let's start our Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to keep adding those to the Q&A box and we'll dive right in. I know we will probably, I'm seeing some questions that are specific to folks' specific profile. And while I wish that we could go and kind of talk about good schools for people to apply to with certain stats, it's so dependent on the individual person, and we just don't have enough information here and now to be able to answer those questions. So we'll stick with more of the broad ones, but if you have specific questions to your individual stats and self, definitely schedule a consultation with us to talk through those a little bit more. All right, so one question that we definitely see a lot and we'll answer here is test optional really test optional, or does not submitting a standardized test score hurt you? And I'm assuming this is for schools that are actually like test optional, but we can also discuss test blind briefly as well.
Yeah, there are some schools, such as the University of California system, that don't allow you to submit scores, don't want to know your scores. They have created a rubric for evaluating applications that does not factor that in. And there are a few other examples of that as well. So if the school is test blind, it means they're not going to review your standardized scores as part of the admissions decision. They're going to look at all of the other components, your essays, your recommendation letters, your academic performance, all of those great things, your extracurricular accomplishments and the like. For test optional, it's been very fluid in my experience with my students this past year, where we started out the the application cycle in August and September going, okay, we're test optional. And midway through started finding out from some schools that they weren't really test optional, meaning that if they were expecting that if a student submitted the scores, or that a student would submit the scores if the SAT or ACT were roughly at the 50% mark or above. And calculating that can be challenging. Ask your quad counselor for assistance with this. Don't just take the spread that I described, like 1400 and 1550. So then 1475 is the 50% mark. That's not the case. It's going to be skewed much higher towards the top of the range. But if students weren't submitting, then some schools were assuming either they hadn't taken the standardized testing or that their test scores were very low. So we started, saying, well, if you're at that kind of magical 50% or above, we would encourage you to submit. And some schools now are rolling back into, we will be considering tests, ACT and SAT scores going forward. Another thing that I've seen is that AP and IB exam scores took on a renewed level of importance because many students were still taking those exams, and that's a standardized testing score, although it's not the same as an ACT or an SAT, which is much more holistic. So that is something to consider as well.
So unfortunately, the answer is not as cut and dry as we would like. It will depend on your situation, but Jennifer, it sounds like submitting a score, if it's on the high end of the range, is kind of the best option there.
Yeah, and it's going to vary by school, obviously.
Let's see, what is the ideal age to start visiting schools and creating a college list?
I would say there's no ideal age for visiting. I think the first time I ever stumbled onto the Columbia campus, I was a freshman in high school. And that definitely stuck with me a few years later when I was thinking about which colleges to apply to. Ideal age, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't mention an ideal, but I think it's nice to get a feel, whether you do virtual visits on YouTube, like we said, or to actually go to campus sophomore or junior year, just to kind of get an idea of what the environment is like, what the locale is like. Creating your list, I would recommend to have a good list by the midpoint of your junior year, just so you want to be as prepared as you can and make it's a busy time. You want to make it as easy for yourself as you can. I guess it's never too early.
Exactly. And just a thought there as well is that in order to be crafting a balanced school list in your junior year, you need to have your testing done. So don't wait until the fall of your junior year to start, oh, right, SAT, ACT. You want to be front loading that as well. It's possible to, test well in the first couple of test dates and you'll be fine, but you want to have that metric in hand as another data point to assess what's realistic for you and how to create your reach and target schools. The other tip for your campus visit, something that stuck with me actually, Maisha, as you were talking about Columbia, I was remembering, I think I was a sophomore in high school, and one of the upper class students that I had gotten to know from my high school was attending Columbia. And so I visited her, and I stayed with her and hung out and kind of soaked up the campus culture from her point of view and didn't just do the tour. If you can cultivate those contacts either from your school or from your family and friends, a circle, that you can actually visit someone that might be a friend of a friend or a friend of a cousin or a cousin of a friend, just play that game. It really helps to personalize the experience and give you a sense of what it's like to be a student there.
Absolutely. All right. Let's see. Someone asked if we could briefly talk about what is meant by early decision and early commitment schools.
Sure. So schools are increasingly building their first year classes, and they're entering classes from the early decision pool of applications. Some schools offer what's called early decision 1, which is a November deadline, and an early decision 2, which is a January deadline. What early decision means is that you have done your research as a junior and you are 100% committed to attending this particular institution that needs to offer the early decision plan. Not all schools do, but if the school does, you're signing up to say, if you let me into your school, I will be attending. It makes the admissions process from the school's perspective so much more straightforward. They don't have to play the yield game of we admit 6 students so that we get 1 student attending. And what if more or less commit than we were thinking? And we're going to have to put people in hotel rooms, or we're going to have to go find other students because our numbers are low. So schools really like the process. It really simplifies it for students as well. But you have to be 100% sure that that's your school. And some schools don't offer it. The UC system does not offer early decision. They have their application deadline in November, but it's a regular round of decisions. So all of that to say that if you're going to apply to NYU ED1 in November, and you get accepted in December, you withdraw all of your other applications that you might have already submitted, and you commit to that first choice school. The only out that you might have is if the financial aid does not come through for you and you're unable to attend for financial reasons. But otherwise, you're basically stating to that college or university that I'm going to be attending if you let me in. And then schools do the same thing in a more limited number for the January round, where you have that opportunity to maybe try for a higher reach school in November, see if you get in December. And if not, you can have a second choice school that offers the January round of early decisions that will give you a boost in your chances of admission overall.
Great. And I'll also add there, we do have a webinar from a few months ago on the difference between early action, regular or early decision, and regular decision that walks through that in much more detail. So feel free to go watch that for free on our website. All right. So how do you determine how your extracurriculars rank when looking at different levels of schools? Grades and tests are quantitative, but not so much for extracurriculars.
Well, I think if you can make a case saying, look at all these leadership positions I've had, if it's, all the memberships for different clubs that I've had, how passionate I am about extracurricular, and really make it a focal point of your essay or your application, I think, of course, it will kind of stick out in your application above just your scoring. I think extracurriculars is a good way to make your application more personable and more personalized than just being a set of numbers that they receive. So it can also make you stand out from your peers who may have similar stats to you. But let's say we're not playing violin every weekend, or the captain of the football team, or in robotics club. So it really helps craft a persona from a piece of paper. So I would say it's quite important determining what you want your extracurriculars to be, and if you're going to be passionate about them, and if that's going to shine through in your application.
Definitely. And I would add to that if you think about showing your level of intellectual engagement and passion for a subject outside of the classroom. This is an area where you can really shine, even if you haven't achieved top scores in a certain subject. If that's really what makes you passionate and just lights you up, do research in that area. Find opportunities, whether through the Quad Research Institute or through faculty, even at a local community college. Many of my students have found opportunities very local to engage their intellectual pursuits and find out what it means to spend time in a lab doing research for biology, environmental sciences, mathematics, history, whatever your field of study is, there's research that goes on in that area. And if you can show that that's something you've spent time doing, it really, it deepens your knowledge of the subject. It helps you match your interests to the school's interests and research focus. And then it helps to make your application a bit more compelling. The other thing I'll say with extracurriculars is it's true they're not as quantitative and objective as stats. And I saw some questions in there about, different schools use different GPA scales and how do we really assess these? Trust me, the admissions offices at the universities know your school, they know your school's profile, they know what an A- at your school means compared to an A- from somewhere else. They've done all their homework on that end of things. But in terms of your own priorities and goals, I think it really helps to illustrate those to a college. If you can say, look, I've gone above and beyond in this area. I'm really interested in ecology, and I've done science fair projects, and I've gone on to my state and regional science fair competitions, and I narrowly missed ISEF, which is the International Science and Engineering Fair. But getting awards in those kinds of competitions shows that you're taking initiative. You've got those outside interests that you're going to commit time and energy to, and that you're excited about it. And it's something that you're willing to devote sometimes a lot of extra time to. And it can be evaluated through competitions and awards and prizes that are very, very clear and able to demonstrate your interest in that subject area.
Great. And I know you just touched on a different question we have about GPAs and how different high schools calculate them differently. Maybe we can just give just one more quick summary of an answer for that. So I'll repeat the question there, which is, how do you gauge where you fit in the range of GPA when high schools don't calculate this the same way, a 4.0 versus a 5.0 scale? And schools are now mostly test optional, which will skew the range higher given who's submitting SATs into the calculated score.
Yeah, I think Jennifer kind of explained that already, but that colleges are prepared. They have years and years of experience doing this and comparing applicants from schools just like yours versus across the country. So you don't have to worry about that. As long as you think you're a competitive applicant, you don't have to worry about your 4.0 versus a 5.0 across the street. They will be assessing you fairly.
And this is also where your school's information, historical record can be very useful, whether or not your school uses one of the platforms that I described, where you'll have a heat map and it shows, the student with because trust me, there are students with 4.0s and 1,600 SATs or 36 ACTs that don't get into the Ivy League every year. So it's not, you can't just get in on scores alone. But these heat maps will show a trend of, okay, through early decision, these scores were, students from my school were successfully admitted. So that information is really useful to access through your school counselor, as well as working with your quad counselor on the bigger picture.
Great, thank you both. I think we have time for one more question. So let's see. So if someone didn't get into their top college and they decide to go to a community college for a year that has a transfer agreement with the college that they're aiming to go to, is there a higher chance that they'll get in when they apply a second time after that year at the community college?
I am not really familiar with the transfer process, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that if you can identify a school like that that has an affiliation agreement, has a, I'm aware of some in my region where it's a pathway to a nursing degree. You do 2 years at a community college, and then you transfer in as a junior, and you bring your credits in, and you get a nursing degree. All kinds of STEM fields are very well articulated in this area. So that can definitely be a path forward in success. Not knowing the specifics, we can't really comment on your particular case. But I do want to highlight that every year there are students that don't return even to the Ivy League. There are spaces that open up in the sophomore and the junior classes. So transferring in general is something that is a possibility for students if you start at one school and you didn't get into the other and you just want to try applying as a transfer student, you can go for it. There are spaces at the sophomore and junior levels in all schools, varying degrees of numbers each year, but that can be a path forward through your college journey as well.
Fantastic. And then, Maisha, I know you just answered this question by typing an answer, but I think it's important. So one last question. I think it's important for us to cover briefly is someone's hearing different opinions about cost. Some say don't let cost stop you from applying because you never know. And others say to do your due diligence and use the net price calculators because cost could be a significant factor in deciding what school should be on the list that you're thinking about applying to. Do you just want to answer that briefly?
Yeah, sure. I was just saying that it's highly dependent on each individual or each family's financial situation. So of course we can't say yes, you definitely should, or no, you shouldn't. But I think personally, if you don't try, you'll never know. You kind of don't want it to be in the back of your head, oh, I wish I had really tried, especially if it's a dream school of yours and maybe the tuition seems a little bit out of reach. Just, giving it a try, seeing if you do get in, and then looking into scholarships, talking to the financial aid office. There are different potential options and ways to help pay for college. So if it's a place that you're really, really passionate about, I would say go for it and at least apply.
I think there's
Definitely. And
regulators. Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, yeah, with the net price calculators, I think that can be very useful to just compare tuition, room and board and other expenses across institutions, because a $20,000 grant at each school is going to not go as far at some schools as at other schools. But I just wanted to share a little bit about my own experience, because I went through my undergraduate program on financial aid. My parents were elementary school teachers. They found their careers very rewarding, but they did not make a lot of money doing it. And so they took out loans, I took out loans, I got grants and scholarships, both because of financial need and because of academic achievement. And I paid off my student loans in my 30s. I put them into deferment when I went abroad to Japan and did my graduate work there. And that was wonderful to not have to pay them for a little while. But it was definitely a calculated investment that I made it was a challenge at times, but I never regretted it for once. And I think it's just something that every family and every student has to weigh carefully and see. I worked every summer. I worked 10 to 15 to 20 hours a week through school. It was very demanding, but it taught me a lot as well about the real world and about budgeting and making choices all along the way that have proved to be very useful. So definitely, if you're eligible, complete the FAFSA early. It's very important to get that in early. You will find schools like Wash U, schools like Johns Hopkins. There's a whole host of schools that have academic merit scholarships. Sometimes you have to complete a separate application. Sometimes those applications are due in October, November, December, well in advance of a regular application deadline in January. And your quad counselor can help you navigate all of the ins and outs of this. But there are resources that are out there, both for financial need and for academic merit, that you definitely want to make the most of in your application journey.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for answering these questions. I want to thank everyone that joined us tonight. I'm so glad you could spend your Thursday afternoon with us talking about building college lists. Jennifer, Maisha, it was really great to have you both on. I appreciate your time. I hope everyone had a great night. Keep an eye out for an email in the coming day or so that will have a link to the recording of this webinar. And feel free to go on our website and sign up for upcoming webinars and view previous webinars as well that go in depth on a lot of the topics that we covered tonight as well. All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.